Hello everybody, and welcome back to another card game tutorial video. In this video we'll be adding phases to our game. So by the end of this video your game should act like this. So as you can see in the center of the field we are printing out the phases of our game. And as you see, when this card, or when this hand mulligans, that allows the opponent to draw a prize card. So you'll see that this phase will say select a prize card, and this phase will say opponent's turn. So what's going to happen now is I'll be able to select a prize card, and then it tells me it's my draw phase. And as you can see, I won't be able to play anything or do anything until I draw a card. So now that I draw this card, I can then set a card down, and it says it's my set phase. And then whenever I do play a card, we're going to create a message that will create a preview at the other end as well. For now, the only way we're going to change the player's turn is if the opponent does an attack. Later on, we'll create a button that will end the turn without attacking. But for now, this is the way we will do it. So as you see, when I do the attack, you'll see that the phase will change from opponent's turn to draw phase, and then from set phase to opponent's turn. And then this player will then be able to do the same. In the next video, we're going to go over adding conditions to only allow an attack or move to be used if the appropriate energy condition is met. And we will also be going over Pokemon powers and how to implement those in our games. So if you're interested in that, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to be able to download these files for the server and the card game, be sure to check out my Patreon, linked in the description below. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we are going to address some bug fixes. The first one we are going to address will be in our object field card. So in the step event, when a card is destroyed, when the health points is equal to the damage counters, we don't want this condition to be equal to. We want it to be less than or equal to. Because in the case where you do more damage than they have health points, you still want that card to be destroyed. And the next thing we want to do is when we have a card destroyed, we only want to send this message one time. The way we have it now is it's going to set the prize select Boolean value to the opponent to be true continuously until this card reaches the discard pile. Now what we're going to do is, right now we have if the prize select variable is true, then you can select a prize card. But we're actually going to change that to a numerical value in case the opponent can draw more than one card. So what this problem will cause is, while this card is going to the discard pile, the opponent's prize select variable will increment by 1 until this card reaches the discard pile. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that this is sent only one time. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to create a variable called isSent. And if that has not been sent, we will then send this message. And then we're going to set isSent is equal to true. And then we want to initialize the isSent variable in the create event to be false. And the next thing we want to address is, if you remember in the last video when we performed an attack at the player end, that attack animation isn't carried over to the opponent object at the other client. So what we want to do is we want to alter our message send damage script. down here in the step event. So what we want to do is we want to alter this message to pass another value, and that value is going to be player.moveSelect. And we want to pass that to each instance of this message. Then, in the message send damage script, we're going to write argument 2 to the buffer. And then we want to uncomment out this code we did before. The message that we are sending to the opponent will update the opponent's field card. Now we want to uncomment this out because this changes our representation of the opponent. And since we are changing something of the opponent's, we want to update it on their end, but we also want to update it on our end. So when we send this damage, we want to make sure that our representation of the opponent is also updated. But since we are changing the message structure here, we want to go to our client handle message script. And for the message send damage, we want to take in another local variable. And we're going to call that local variable move. And then what we want to do with this move variable is we want to set the opponent object variable moveSelect equal to that move variable. So setting this value to the value we are reading in to this variable will animate the opponent object's pokeball animation. But as you can see, we have the opponent object here. This was a mistake from the last video. When the damage is being sent to us, it is updating our damage on our cards, or on the player's cards. But as you can see, I have the opponent object here, and not the player's field card, so we're going to change this to object player. So that's all of the changes we needed to do to animate attacks at the opponent end. But now we want to update our prize select variable. If you remember from earlier in the video, we're going to change it from a Boolean value to a numerical value. So if we go to prize select, whenever this message is being sent, we're going to set the prize select value equal to true. But we're actually going to change that to prize select plus plus because we want to increment this value. And then in the prize card object, whenever we select a prize card, instead of setting it to false, we want to decrement that value. And then in our player object, when we initialize this value, instead of initializing it to false, we're going to initialize it to 0. So now that we've made all of these changes on the client end, now let's make the appropriate changes on the server end. So in our server handle message script, we want to go down to the send damage case, and we want to add another buffer write here. So now we are writing to the buffer what we are reading from it, and that value is going to be that move variable. So now that we have this, let's make sure our game still works properly. So I'm going to start the server, and I'm going to export the card game to an executable. So if everything's done right, if I set a card down for both clients, if I attack with this client, then this Squirtle should also do the attack animation, which it does. And we can see that our opponent object field cards are being updated and the player's field card objects are being updated when we do this attack. Now I want to make sure I can still select a prize card whenever I defeat the opponent, and I can. So everything still works. So now let's get into the phases that we're going to add to our game. The first thing we want to do is initialize the phases we are going to add to our game. So if we go to our player object in the create event, and we go to our game phases, we are going to add a draw phase boolean and set that equal to false, and a field phase boolean that we are going to set to false. Now in the draw event of our player, we want to display what phase we are in of the game. So in order to do that, we're going to expand on this if statement, and we're going to add a few else if statements. So if an opponent object doesn't exist, we're going to print out waiting for opponent. Now, if we are in the beginning phase, when we are drawing our hand and mulliganing, we are going to print out starting game. Whenever an opponent is able to draw a prize card, the only thing that they'll be able to do is draw a prize card. So the next thing we're going to do is, if this is true, write out select prize card, because they will not be able to set or attack in this situation. And then if it's the draw phase, we're going to draw phase. If it's the opponent's turn, which means their field phase is true, we're going to print out set phase. And then if none of these are true, then we're going to print out opponent's turn. So that's just to inform the player what phase they're in. But now since we're adding phases, we only want one player to have their draw phase asserted. So if we go to the step phase, after the mulligan phase is when the draw phase is set to true. So if we go to alarm 2, we are going to add an if statement that says if turn is equal to 1, we're going to set the draw phase equal to true. Now, turn has not been initialized yet, nor have we set it to anything. So in the create event, we are going to set turn equal to 0. And whenever the client connects to the server will then update this value and give it a turn. So turn will either be 1 or 2. So the next thing we want to go to is our deck object. And we want to create a condition here that only allows the player to draw a card if their draw phase is equal to true. So what we're going to put here is if the player's draw phase is not true, return. And then we're going to remove the pause script here, because we no longer need that for this. And we're actually going to pause the game if the draw phase is true. So we don't want that to be here. So we're going to comment this out, and then we're going to add a condition here that says if the player draw phase is true, return 1. So now if the player has drawn a card, we want to change some of the phase values. So what we want to do is we want to set the draw phase equal to false, and then set the field phase equal to true. And then one last thing we want to do before moving on to the card objects and the field card objects is if it is the player's turn to draw a card, we want to let them know, or we want to have something that signifies that they need to draw a card. So in the draw event of the deck object, we're going to add the following condition. If the draw phase is true, we're going to set the draw color to be black, and we're going to align what we draw to the center. And then we are going to draw the text draw at the position of the deck, and then we are going to move it over and up for each card in the deck by the deck buffer. This is just so that the draw string will be in the center of the topmost card of the deck. Now we want to go to our card objects, and we want to add a condition here that does not allow us to use this card if the field phase is not true. So what we're going to do is say if the player field phase is not true, return. And then we want to do the same thing for the field cards. But since the field card does not have a left released event, what we did is we created one down here. Now, what we want to do here is we want to add a condition that says if the field phase is not true, we want to force the selected value to be false and return. Just so we can still have all of this script going, except we will not be able to attack or use any of the Pokemon moves. But now that we have this, we now need to add the appropriate messages to our game. So if we go to our client object, we're going to add 3 more macros. And those 3 macros are going to be message turn, message card show, and message turn change. So the first one is going to be sent from the server to the player connecting to the server. And it's going to give that client a value of either 1 or 2 to let it know if it's going to be the first or second player. Message card show is going to be used whenever we play a card. We want the opponent client to see what card we played. And then the last one will change the draw phase of the opponent to be true so that they can start their turn. So now if we go to our client handled message script, we're going to go to the top where it says message join. And now we're going to make a few changes. Since we are sending a message to the client connecting to the server, that message is going to be sent before anything else. And the way that we have this going is whenever we receive a message, we create an opponent object. But now the server is going to be the sender of the first message instead of the opponent client. So the way we have it now, if the server sends a message to the client, it's going to create an opponent object for that server. And then whenever a message is being received from the opponent client, it's going to create another opponent object, and we don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this line of code and comment it out, because we don't want this opponent object to be created until after that first message is being received. So what we're going to do is we are going to add it to the message join case. And we're going to make it a regular variable instead of a local variable. And then we're also going to add it to the message hand change case. And we're doing this because these are the first two messages that are sent from the opponent object. Now, the first message that the first player receives from the opponent is message join. But the first message the second player receives is message hand change. They don't receive this message, so that's why we have it in both of these. So now the only way an opponent object is going to be created is if the client receives a message that is sent only from that opponent object, not from the server. So the message that the server is going to be sending is going to be message turn. So we're going to go all the way down here and we're going to add another case. Now, all we're going to do for this case is with the player object, we're going to set its turn variable equal to whatever the server is sending to us. And that's going to be the size U8. And that's all we will need to do for this. But now if we go to the server program, we need to add the new macros and then add the message turn buffer. And that's going to be generated whenever a client joins the server. So whenever a client joins the server then sends the opponent the following information. But now we want to create a second message that we're going to send back to the client that is joining. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this over and I'm going to paste it right beneath this network send raw. Now, I'm not going to send the message ID message join, but the new message, and that's going to be message turn. And then I'm going to pass it a variable called turn. And I also need to pass it the socket ID But now we need to initialize this turn variable. And we're going to create it as a local variable. And we're going to set that equal to a script called script find turn. And we're going to pass it one value called socket ID. Now, this script is going to be almost identical to the script find opponent we have. So I'm going to create this script and we're going to call it script find turn. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this over and paste it here. Now what it's going to do is it's going to do the same thing that this script is doing. It's going to go through and it's going to find the socket ID within the match array. But instead of returning the socket ID of the opponent, it's going to return whether it's the first player that connected or the second player. So if I go back here, instead of having match array, I'm going to put 1, and here I'm going to put 2. So again, what this script is doing is it's going to go through the match array and locate the socket ID. And if it was put in the first position, we know that it was the first player that connected to the server. If it's put in the second position, we knew that it's the second player connected to the server. And we're going to use this information to determine which goes first. So the first one who connected to the server goes first. So now we have this variable, it's being written here, and we can send it in this buffer. But since it's only a 1 or a 2, we want to use buffer size U8. So now that we have that, let's test that out. So we're going to export our game, and let's load up our server. So if we did this correctly, the phases should be printed in the center of the room. We shouldn't be able to play a card on the field if we have to draw a card, and the second player that connects should not be able to draw a card. So starting game. It's the opponent's turn on both ends, so that is not correct. Now the reason why the first player isn't able to draw is because in our server program, when we copied this message over and pasted it here, this message is being sent to the opponent. This message needs to be sent to the player. So we're going to change this to socket ID. So now that we have this, we can reload the server, reload our games, and the first player should now be able to draw a card. So it says draw phase, opponent's turn, I'm able to draw, and I cannot set a card on the field. Now that I draw a card, I'm able to set a card down. But now what we want to do is we want to make sure that the player cannot set more than one Pokemon down at a time and more than one energy card at a time. So the first thing we want to do for that is, in our card game program, in the create event, let's remove the hand initialization we have had from prior videos, just so we can have a random hand. And then we want to add 2 new variables to track whether or not we've set a Pokemon or an energy card down. And we're going to call that Pokemon set. We're going to set that equal to false, and energy set, which will also equal to false. And we want to set these to be true anytime we play a Pokemon or an energy card. So that will be in our card object. So what we want to do for each condition that allows us to set a Pokemon down, we want to create a condition that says if the player Pokemon set value is true, do not set this card down. And then if it is not true, we're going to set it equal to true, so that after they set this one down, another one cannot be set. So we're going to copy this over, and we are going to paste it in the other condition that allows us to set a Pokemon, which is whenever we want to evolve that card. And then we also want to do the same for when we set an energy card down. So if we find the energy condition, and we paste that here, instead of it being Pokemon set, we're going to put energy set. So these will remain true until our turn is over, but then we need to set these back to false whenever it is our turn again. And we're going to do that in our client handle message script. So whenever it's our turn again, we're going to reset the switches. So we're going to do that in a new script called reset switches. And within that script, we're going to set all of the switches we want to reset back to their original states. And so far we only have two, Pokemon set and energy set. So now we can test that, but before we do that, let's add the code to create a preview for whenever we play a card so that the opponent can see that card we played. So if we go back to our card object, we're going to add a new script called script message card show. And we're going to pass that a card number. So let's create that script. And within this script, we're going to construct another buffer packet. And what we're going to do is we're going to write the message ID, which is going to be message card show, and argument 0, which is the card we want to show the opponent. And then we are going to send it to the opponent. So that's all we will need for that. But we'll want to add it to each condition in our card object left released event. So we have the first one for when we play a base set Pokemon. The next one will be when we play a regular trainer card. So we'll just put that at the bottom. But instead of the local variable card number, we are going to use the card number of this card object. And then we also want to do this whenever we use an energy card. But before we move on to the next condition, I actually want to move this line of code to be within this condition here. Because if we don't end up playing that energy card, we don't want this energy set value to equal true. Because the way we have it now is if I play this card anywhere on the field, it would automatically set that energy set to be true. And we only want to do it if we're hovering over a field position and at that field position a card exists. So it's very important to move that here. And then we want to continue adding this script call, and we're going to do it down here, except we're going to use the local variable card number again, and then we're going to add it to the assist trainer condition here. But this one's going to be a little tricky. Not all of the assist trainer cards are removed from our hand here. So if we go to our assist trainer script call, we will need to add that card show script call to each assist card condition that doesn't utilize the remove from hand variable. That will be Clefairy Doll. So we're going to add that here. And we're going to use the local variable card number again. Defender plus power. Remove from hand, remove from hand, remove from hand. Okay. But now that we have that, we now need to address that message in our client handle message script. So we're going to create another case. So we're going to initialize a local variable called card number, and we're going to set that equal to buffer read with the buffer size of U32. And then we are going to create a preview object and we're going to do that in the middle of the room. So we're going to do room width divided by 2, and room height divided by 2. And we want to do that on the instances layer. And the object we are going to create, which will be object preview. And then with object preview, we are going to set its card num equal to the local variable card number. And then we're going to set its alarm 0 equal to 40. And that's all we will need to do for this message. But when it comes to printing out this preview, I don't want it to be in the dead center of the room, because whenever this happens, this will be printed above anything else in the room. And I don't want this to cover the Pokeball animating whenever a Pokemon is summoned. So I'm actually going to move this over a little bit just so that can still be shown. And you'll see that when we test it out. So here I'm going to subtract the X position by the big card width divided by 2. But now that we have that, let's create the preview object. I'm going to set its sprite to be the card back sprite, even though it will never be seen as that. And then in the create event, I want to initialize all of the big sprites, just so we can utilize those sprites. And then in the step event, I'm going to change the sprite index to equal big sprite at the card num. And then in alarm 0, whenever that alarm finishes, we're going to destroy this object. And then in the draw event, what we want to do is if the alarm 0 counter is less than 10, we want the image alpha to equal alarm 0 divided by 10, just so it can fade out slowly. And then we want this to be printed above anything else, so we're going to set its depth equal to -3000. And then we're going to set draw self, just so we can see it. And that's all we'll need to do for this object. But since we created a case in our client-handled message script for card show, we also need to do this for the server end. So if we go to the server and the server handle message script, message discard, which is right here, this has the same buffer structure as message card show. So we can just add this case here and utilize the same code. And that's all we'll need to do for that. So if we load the server and export our card game, we should now only be able to play one card at a time, and whenever that card is played, it creates a preview at the other end. So I'm going to set Magikarp down after I draw a card. As you can see, Magikarp was displayed here, and then it faded away. And now I should only be able to play one energy card at a time. So now if I try to play another one, we know that that works. And I should only be able to play one Pokemon at a time, but since I can't draw anymore, we'll have to test that later. In order to fully test this, we need to be able to change turns. So that will be the last thing we do in this video. So what we're going to do is, whenever we attack with a field card, we are going to change the turn. So if we go down to our left released condition in the step event of our field card object, which is here, and in the conditions for when we attack, we are going to add another message, and that message is going to be called message turn change. So beneath message send damage is where we will put this message call. And we're going to do that to each one. So let's create this message. So the only thing that will be in here is just the message ID. But since we've created this message, we need to create a case for this in our client handled message. So we're going to put case message turn change. And within this case, we're going to put with player object. We're going to set draw phase equal to true. And then we're going to reset the switches. And we actually don't need it here. So let's just remove that, just because that won't do anything. And that's all we will need to do in the card game program. So if we then go to our server program, if we find message evolve, these cases have the same buffer structure as message turn change. So we can recycle this code here because all it's doing is sending the message ID. Now, one more thing I want to add to our card game is if the opponent is able to draw a prize card, I want to have something on the screen that lets them know they are able to. So I'm going to load up the server and then go back to the card game program. So then if I find the prize card, what I want to do is I want to draw out text that says they are able to select any prize card on the field. So if prize select is true, I'm going to set the text color to black, the alignment to the center, and I'm going to draw select at the center of this prize card object. So that's all we'll need to do for this. So now let's test this. So now the player should be able to go back and forth between turns. So if I set Squirtle down, which I can't because it's my draw phase, I then should not be able to drop Poliwag down because we are only able to drop one Pokemon at a time, or per turn. And then same for energy cards. And the only way to change turns currently is if we initiate an attack. So that's what I'll do. But we have one problem so far, and that's this still says set phase. What I didn't do is in the field card object, beneath this turn change, I need to set the player field phase equal to false. And do that for each case where an attack is selected. So that will solve that problem. So let's reload the game to make sure that still works. So now if I select continue, we have another issue where the opponent is unable to select a prize card. So we're going to need to address that. But first, let's make sure that the change we just made is working properly. So it still says set phase. I draw 2 more cards, and then I change the term. So now it says opponent's turn and draw phase. So that's done appropriately. But now the opponent can play. We have 2 set up. And now it's the opponent's turn. So let's see what happens when we destroy one of the opponent's cards to see if we are able to select a prize card. So if I put War Turtle down, this should destroy that card, which it allows me. So my issue is with the message of sending a prize card. So I need to address that. And the reason why both were able to select a prize card is because in the field card object, whenever the card is destroyed, we allow the opponent to select a prize card. But if we go to our opponent field card representation in the step event, we have that here as well. This shouldn't be here. So we're going to remove that. Another instance that allows the opponent to draw a prize card is if we mulligan. So every time we mulligan, we want to allow the opponent to draw a prize card. So if I go to the player object and we mulligan, we want to allow the opponent to select a prize card. So we're just going to add this script call here for every time we mulligan. And this should be the final change we need to make to our game for this video. So now that we have this, if we hit continue, I hope one of our, see, as you can see, they both mulliganed. Now, this one mulliganed maybe 3 times and this one twice. So this opponent should be, so this player should be able to draw at least 2 cards. So there's the first one. Apparently they only mulliganed once. And this one should, I know for sure, did it at least 2 or 3 times. So 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. So we know that works. Now if I set a card down, or I have to draw first, and then I set a card down, change the turn, and do the same here. Let's see what happens now when we destroy one of the cards. So now that this card was destroyed, because this player destroyed it, this player should be able to select a prize card and not this player. So that has been done correctly. Now, in the next video, we're going to go over adding conditions to only allow an attack or move to be used if the appropriate energy condition is met. And we will also be going over Pokemon powers and how to implement those in our games. So if you're interested in that, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to be able to download these files for the server and the card game, be sure to check out my Patreon linked in the description below. Until next time.